Mr. Danielson, thank you so much for your time. And let's start talking from the EU-Georgian cooperation in terms of Eastern Partnership. And since the 2014, since the assignment of the association agreement, where are we now? What is the stage of our relations? How can you describe the situation we have right now in this process?
Right now we are at a stage where our relations are on the way to be substantially enriched. And that is due to the association agreement you mentioned and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Because those include concrete measures which now are on the way being implemented. And that will lead to a very much closer cooperation than what we have had until now. Until now we have been very close in concrete terms.
Do we have a successful process in that?
Yeah, I think we have. I mean, if you see, I was looking on statistics, and what you see is an increase in trade, for instance, and that's exactly what this is about. We see it in concrete products reaching the European market, if you take the economic side. Kiwis that are in the Lidl supermarket in Germany, nuts and other agriculture products which are reaching other member states. We also see it in our joint engagement when it comes to public administration, where we are now from the EU side supporting the rollout of the one-stop shop that is underway here in Georgia. We see it in the support to small and medium-sized enterprises, startups, who would like to enter the European market, and where we together with Georgian authorities and with support from us we go in and help in order to both get financing but also to get advice on what to do and how to move forward. And I think we see it also in the area of infrastructure. We have now discussed with the government, and we have entered into to supporting the East-West Highway. Together with European financial institutions. So we have a number of areas where this concretely is moving forward, and it is important because it will also provide the concreteness towards the citizens of Georgia.
In terms of the individual personalities, individual Georgian citizens, do you have any kind of figures how do they benefit from this kind of association agreement and DCFTA? Is there any kind of conclusions during this period of time that we already have achieved?
It's a bit early to say, because we, as you rightly pointed out, this is fairly recent that we are in this process. But as I mentioned, we see the trade increasing. We see the linkages between, I'm now talking about on the business side, being increasing as well, and that concretely leads to jobs. More export to the EU will mean jobs here in Georgia, and that is of course to the advantage of the citizen. We also see it in the kind of areas that we are developing for our cooperation. I had interesting discussions today on education, yes, where I understand that one of the challenges for Georgia,
the biggest challenge,
is how to increase the quality. And there's a very ambitious reform program that the government have put in place. That fits very well with what we have in the association agreement, and we are already supporting it, and we will continue. And that, for instance, when it comes to the strengthening and of vocational education and training, where the jobs are, but also when it comes to the dialogue on this important area. So there you have some examples. But you're right, we should identify more of it. And I'm convinced that as we are moving ahead on this path, which is a demanding path, I'm sure that we're going to see concrete examples for the citizens of Georgia of the result of this.
And what is the next step, where we are now and what we are going to do next?
So the next step is the hard work of seeing to that the ambitious agenda that is in the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, that one now is fully put into place. And that will ask for efforts on our side, on the EU side, support from us to you, but also substantive efforts from Georgia in order to make it. And in concrete terms, what are we talking about? Standards. Georgia has already adopted 7,000 standards. But of course, in order to get the attractive Georgian agriculture production better on the EU market.
Some of these standards are painful for the business producers.
Of course they are. I mean, that's true. They are painful. And there are calls for laboratories to be established and so on and so forth. But the reward is the possibility of coming into the European market. 500 million consumers. And you know, the Kiwis yeah, exactly, which are in Germany today, huge market. Paris, the wine, or for that sake, although that is not so much from Europe, I think it's very interesting what you do on the side of education, with a substantive number of foreign students coming here. I think there are 30,000 students or something coming from other countries. That is also part of the economy. That is creating jobs, and you get also lots of bright people here who some of them probably will stay.
So this is kind of part of the Georgians' responsibility as well. And EU talks about the shared responsibilities in its strategic documents and so on. What is your feeling finally? Is Georgia responsible partner for you?
Very much
so far.
Very much so. Very much so. What I've experienced during these 2 days is a very, very strong determination on the part of the government, on the part of the civil society, and on the part of other interlocutors for moving ahead on this agenda. And that's exactly what is needed. It's only through getting very strong support for these kind of reforms that they will be really successful. So definitely, and that is not a surprise, because if you look back on our cooperation over the last 10 years or even more, Georgia has always been a very reliable partner in moving the process forward.
And finally, I would like to ask you in this part about the Eastern Partnership itself. I mean, there are some challenges for Eastern Partnership, as we can see, because the crisis in Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine, Moldova's new president who's promising to leave the association agreement and further integration with Russia, and also we can't say about the Belarus, Azerbaijan and Armenia that they are the very good partners of the Eastern Partnership. So what is the future of the Eastern Partnership? Is it the time for a thinking of the Eastern Partnership policy?
Yeah, I think we like all the kind of partnerships, we need always to think in terms of what can we do in order to make it even better. And in the case of the Eastern Partnership, our sense is that we need to come back to the concrete results, to become much more clear. And what does it mean? Well, it means work on the economy. What can we do together, and where can the Eastern Partnership help the countries concerned to let loose the potential of the economy? Work on connectivity. There are all the issues of transport and energy networks, which Eastern Partnership can play an important role. Mobility. How can we get the better movement for people also within Eastern Partnership and towards the EU. And I think also we can do a lot concretely in the Eastern Partnership as regards governance. Learning from each other. There are experiences with the EU which we are ready to share. There are experiences from Georgia. The one-stop shop model is a very impressive approach. How should the judiciary be reformed? What can be done together in order to get a more and better public administration? So there are, I think, concrete issues like that. And I think the importance now, in view of the summit in November in Brussels on the Eastern Partnership, is to see to that these concrete examples, concrete measures are coming forward there, and then moves forward in the countries concerned and in the partnership.
Can we say that the Eastern Partnership project is still the successful project?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. There is a political part of it, which is the countries who are part of it, and this is a way for them to articulate themselves towards the EU, for EU to articulate itself towards the countries. But it's also a partnership which has already delivered. We forget that. I mean, when we discuss integrated border controls here, there are lots of experiences that have been discussed already within the partnership on that issue, and therefore helps Georgia or helps other countries when they are putting that into place. I think with concrete measures in the future, I'm convinced that the Eastern Partnership will be a very successful cooperation.
Yeah, let's speak a little bit about some EU itself. I mean, EU facing the most biggest challenges since its establishment, maybe after the Brexit, after the US elections, and this is kind of unpredictable relations nowadays with the EU, with the US, and also is EU ready to face these kind of challenges and to respond to these kind of issues right now?
It's clear that it's a challenging period for us all, and that is also true for the EU.
Even Mrs. Mogherini mentioned it several times that the even existence of EU sometimes is questioned.
Yeah, and so that's clear. Challenges are there. Will EU address them? Yes, I think so. It's not the first time that the EU stands in for challenges. And what we see now is on the economy, how measures for internal market becoming better, a digital internal market, energy union, to mention three important projects, how that is now being implemented together with the investment plan within the EU. When it comes to issues relating to another challenge, which is the whole migration refugee challenge, there is a strong determination from the member states to move forward both jointly, internally in the EU, with looking into the external border control, asylum policy, but also externally in terms of support to Turkey, to Lebanon, to Jordan when it comes to Syrian refugees, to the countries south of the Mediterranean, for both supporting those who are transit countries for refugees and migrants, but also to help those countries from where, in particular, the migrants come, to get a better economic development, and therefore people are not feeling that they have to leave. All of that is done within the EU context, joint policies. And the same when it comes to issues relating to security, for taking other of the challenges ahead. And there are other challenges out there. Brexit will be one, that's clear. That's what we're doing together in the EU. And there are always a constant, I think, reflection that needs to be done on how EU should articulate itself in a world which is more and more globalized, and where EU's interest is to have an open world, open society that provides the necessary elements for growth, for prosperity, for peace as well, and for security. So all that together means that I think EU is very relevant, and is going to take up these challenges as it has done before. And it's interesting because this is, of course, 60 years since the founding of the EU. So it gives it even more relevance to show that this is what the organization can do and will do.
You mentioned the migration crisis or refugee crisis. There are two terms that you use today, right now, regarding what is happening. And some analytic thinks that they're talking about the migration, it is kind of good reason for populist politicians to speak about that, and it's better to use the term refugees because this is kind of people who are flying because of conflicts and in the Middle East and in the Central Asia and so on. Maybe there are some kind of problems regarding the usage of terms and exact terms. What the problems do we face in reality?
I agree with you, and it is important to use the right term. There are approximately 64 million people who are not living at home, who are displaced. Of these 64 million, 25 million are refugees. Refugees means that they are fleeing because of political conflict or because of political persecution, or for other reasons as well. So these are the two terms, and you're right. We should have them. Now there are different ways that these people are being treated within international law. For the 25 million, there is the Geneva Convention, which sets out clearly the obligation for those countries who have signed it to act in a certain way when it comes to refugees. For the others, it is an issue for each individual country to take a decision on how it articulates itself to somebody who would like to come to the country. So therefore, this is the terminology. But what I was trying to convey was to point to the fact that in the EU there is more of a joint standing, both when it comes to the issue of refugees, basically because we are standing on the same ground, which is the Geneva Convention, but also when it comes to the issue of migrants in the broader context.
The strategy of European Union about the foreign and security policy mentions the EU is living in the very competitive world. Who are the most biggest competitors of European Union in terms of politics, in terms of economics? Which players, which actors EU thinks that there are the most biggest competitors for that?
Well, I think you can't identify them in that way. I mean, depends on what we're talking about. When we talk about the global strategy and when we talk about the challenges for the future, they have everything to do from climate change to violence to what we just discussed, and also economic. Then you have also economic challenges.
Yes. For instance, in an economic challenge, in an economy way, who are the biggest competitors of EU? For instance, in economy.
Well, once again, you know, you cannot.
There isn't one or two.
You can't identify it like that. EU is the biggest economic entity in terms of trade. Depending on which segment you are identifying, there are different competitors. And I think one should not see that as something negative. The fact that there are competitors outside is part of the...
Competition is a good thing, actually.
Yes, that's part of the open society. That's part of the whole idea of having free trade, and that is to the benefit of economic prosperity. What's important for the EU is to see to that the collective of countries and the countries individually are competitive, and that they are able to draw the full benefits out of this open, globalized world.
Okay, I will ask you the straight question, because there are a lot of talks about the EU and Russia's relations as the main competitors. For instance, in terms of political relations in several regions, for instance, in the Eastern Europe, for instance, in Ukraine and the former Soviet countries and so on. Is there thinking inside the EU, in strategical thinking about this competition or not? Or maybe this is not the good explanation, being competitors. Maybe there is some kind of...
There is a EU policy has been established towards Russia, and there are council conclusions on it. Most recently, those conclusions have been about the specific issues relating to decisions have been taken as regards sanctions, and I don't need to go into the background to those. So, there are policies established, and that develops as we are moving ahead.
Also, one of the most criticized issues regarding EU is its EU's security system. That, for instance, the EU's partners from the Northern America, they are criticizing EU spending about its own security. Is there any kind of rethinking of the security system inside the EU right now?
Well, first we have a common foreign security policy and a common defense policy, but that one is very much related to peacekeeping and reflections on where we can do things together. Very much of this defense dimension is not within the EU, it's within NATO for many of the countries. And then for some of the countries who are not members of NATO, they have their own independent defense policy. And that's why that is being discussed and addressed.
Finally, I would like to ask you about the enlargement process. And enlargement is the maybe best way to show that you are strong, for instance. What is happening right now in enlargement policy? Recently, EU was working hardly with the Balkan states and about the membership of the Balkan states. So what is happening in that state?
Well, it's very, very much alive. There were the member states together discussed it in December, and they agreed on the policy, and that is the policy that has been pursued since a long time. That means that for the Western Balkan countries, there is a clear perspective of membership in the EU. Negotiations are underway with 2 of those countries, and the others are in various stages of the process. And it's a very clear and elaborate way in order to reach the stage when you negotiate. And each step is linked to the performance of the country concerned. And the background to this is that in order to become member of the EU, you need to be prepared, and you need to have the ability to take on fully all the commitments that comes with EU membership. And that takes time. That is structural reforms, that is substantive reforms, and that is the process that the Western Balkan countries are in right now. So that is where we are on the enlargement process. And with Turkey, there are enlargement negotiations. They are presently there, but there are also a reality, which is that Turkey has not fully committed to something called the Ankara Protocol, and that has put certain brakes on how far we can go in those discussions.
And last question about Georgia again. What is Georgia's future with the EU? I mean, about the membership already, because again, as we can see, Georgia is almost only stable partner in the Eastern Partnership process. So what is our future with the EU membership?
Well,
I know this is not hardly discussed right now.
No, we don't discuss it like that, because that is not the issue. The issue now is, because it's so right that Georgia shares the values of democracy, of rule of law, of fundamental rights. And that is also what the EU member states stands for, and also other partners stands for. And I think in the Eastern Partnership, what is going to be essential is that, and for Georgia, is that this process now continues with full vigor, the process of doing the reforms that we just discussed. And that Georgia can be the lighthouse for partners around on how reforms can be done, how society can move forward, how prosperity can be built, and that from the EU point of view, we fully, and that we do already, will continue to stand fully behind those efforts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.